Somewhere at the foot of a cliff, a battle was taking place in the middle of the night. A man aimed at the demon cult member and pounced on him. Once he got close, he delivered a fatal blow. It was the rising star of martial arts, Baek Mule. He looked up at the top of the cliff and shouted that they had finally met. The heavenly demon Aura, who was standing at the top, looked down at him and crossed his arms. Mule's allies became very nervous when they felt the immense pressure. Mule smiled nervously and thought that, even on his own, his spirit was not weakened. As expected of the head of the demon clan, who had ruled an entire era, a fierce and cold face, a true legend of the demon path. The leader of the heavenly demon cult, Aura, was the supreme being that the followers of the cult worshipped. They risked their lives to carry out his will. It was only a matter of time before the entire world fell at his feet, but he appeared unfazed by Baek Mule. Aura asked if he had any last words. Asura gritted his teeth, then threw his head back and laughed loudly, spreading demonic energy everywhere, which made his opponents feel uneasy. Neil covered his face from the raging gusts of wind and gritted his teeth, thinking it would be enough for him to become a victim for heroic stories. He even felt sorry for killing Aura so quickly. So be it, Neil thought. He would play with him a little longer. He told him to attack and shouted that today he would finish him off. However, Aura was in no hurry. His gaze became menacing, and loud words of mercy suddenly came from his mouth. Maul froze in place and thought in shock. Was it his imagination? The heavenly demon, the strongest warrior of the demon path, was too proud to beg for his life in such a pitiful way. But Asura said it seemed his voice was not full of despair enough. He asked if they could spare him just this once. Mule realized that Aura was using a voice amplification technique. The heavenly demon promised to live quietly, unnoticed, in the mountains and never to show up in Jianghu again, so they should spare him. Mule shouted in rage that it was impossible. His allies glanced nervously at each other. He gritted his teeth, thinking that his plan to become a hero in this decisive battle had been ruined by this cowardly demon cult leader. Asura called him brother and asked him to save face, begging him again using the amplification technique. Mule remained silent as his whole body trembled. Then he took a step forward, pushed off the ground, and headed towards Aura, shouting that if Aura was afraid of losing face, he should just die here. Aura nervously pulled out his sword to respond and asked Mule to reconsider. Mule shouted in anger, declaring that Aura was neglecting his martial arts until the very end. The heavenly demon gritted his teeth and charged, wondering if he would die there. They clashed, attacking each other fiercely. The fight ended in one blow. Baek Mule, who had been confident of his victory, ended up dying. 22 years later, in a cult village deep in the mountains, Asura still thought about that fight and wondered why he hadn't used his strongest move. But thanks to his restraint, he was able to maintain his position and raise a new generation. However, due to his obsession with power, his 3 sons had fought for the throne, and all ended up buried in the ground. There was one remaining son, the protagonist, Diang, who stood in his way. Diang greeted him respectfully, asking if he was doing well. The heavenly demon smiled at the sight of him, thinking his youngest son was not blinded by the lust for power. He immediately knew Diang would become the strongest leader of the cult. As Asura passed by him, he told Diang not to worry and thought that one day his son would surpass him. Yugang, another cult member, turned as if to say something, but one of the other members remarked that he had never thought the leader could be so kind. As expected, Master Duyang would take his place. The interlocutor agreed, adding that Duyang was the son of the heavenly demon himself. Hearing their words, Diang nervously clutched the note in his hand and went to his chambers. Sitting at his table, he drew something on a piece of parchment with a brush. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. He asked who it was. The torture expert, Sang Sagak, entered, bowed to greet the young master, and then smiled. Sang Sagak reported that the leader had asked him to update the young master on the progress of torturing a member of the Orthodox sect. Diang thought his father must want to evaluate his abilities. He listened carefully as Sang Sagak explained that the criminal had been tortured in the underground prison for about 3 days. On the first day, the man was skinned, and then he was soaked in. On the second day, they resorted to torture with a pig, and on the third day, the prisoner lost the lower part of his body. After finishing his report, Sang Sagak smirked. Thinking that even in a demonic cult, he was the only one capable of such elaborate torture. He believed the young cult leader must be pleased with him. Contrary to his expectations, the young leader suddenly jumped up from his chair and slammed his palms on the table, shouting that it wasn't enough. Sagak was about to apologize for going too far, but upon realizing the meaning of his words, he was greatly surprised. Nervously pursing his lips, he wondered if his torture hadn't been sufficient. He had expected the leader to scold him for going too far, but now he thought, as expected of the son of the heavenly demon Asura. Sagak bowed to him and excitedly shouted that he promised to work harder, then left, leaving the young master alone. The mix stared at the door for a few seconds, then sank into his chair and sighed tiredly. Nervously, he muttered to himself that these crazy cultists were acting inhumanely, as usual. The cruel things they did made him question if a human could truly behave like this. He wished they would stop reporting such atrocities to him, but he reminded himself that he needed to pull himself together. He was still in the cult and too weak to argue. He couldn't afford to hesitate. He needed to get his bearings. He was still not strong enough. He remembered the words that had come out of his mouth and, with a grim face, muttered that he had shouted it out without thinking. He had said they should torture the prisoner even more. Clutching the parchment in his hand, he thought bitterly about how they could do this to a man who was merely spying on them. They were all disgusting. He looked down at the note in his hand, which stated that he was unsuitable to be the next leader of the cult. He thought that he couldn't bring himself to tell them otherwise. He imagined himself lounging outside all day, drinking alcohol, and living a carefree life. Clutching his head, he groaned, realizing he didn't want to be the cult leader at all. All he wanted was a normal life, but everyone always misunderstood him. One day, a girl asked where he had been. He told her he had gone to the incinerator to throw out some trash that had been lying on the road. However, the girl spread a rumor that he had gotten into a fight with an Orthodox sect member. The rumor spread further, becoming even more distorted. It got to the point where people believed he had disposed of someone in the underground prison. Hearing this, the torture expert became thrilled, but Yugong had truly just gone to throw out the trash. At this rate, his life in the cult would become a nightmare. He thought he should go and tell his father the truth before he was forced to take on the position of cult leader. Suddenly, a man rushed into the room and called out to him excitedly. Slightly scared, he asked what had happened. One of the 6 elders of the demon cult, Samia Megan, who was always smiling, reported worriedly that the cult leader was in critical condition. This news shocked them greatly. Soon, the day of the funeral arrived. Walking at the head of the funeral procession and holding his father's portrait in his hands, he was still in shock. Suddenly, he stopped and raised a doomed gaze to the sky, wondering how everything could have turned out like this. The day before, he had gone to his father's room and rushed to his bedside, worriedly asking what had happened. One of the old men standing nearby explained that the injury the heavenly demon had received in that fateful fight had come back to haunt him. Breathing heavily, the heavenly demon called out to his son and asked if it was him. Worried, the son begged him not to speak, thinking that it seemed like his father was having a hard time speaking. His father extended his hand to him and asked him to listen carefully. From that moment on, the demon cult was now his. After that, his father's hand fell weakly, and Yugong called out to him in horror. That evening, after the funeral, he came to his chambers, utterly exhausted, and wondered if there were no way for him to escape this fate now. He took a few steps forward, and hearing something suspicious, he frowned slightly. He thought it seemed they had uninvited guests. Feeling a presence behind him, he asked who it was. He immediately turned around, and the man apologized to him. Yugong exclaimed in displeasure, saying he had asked him a question. In a flash, the stranger was next to him, striking him on the shoulders. Yugong immediately lost his balance and clenched his teeth, exclaiming, "Did he hit me right in the pain points? When did he have time?" The man caught him, preventing him from falling, and said that he would have to go with him. He then pushed off the ground and breaking through the ceiling. They found themselves high above the village. Yugong clenched his teeth and thought that, because of the attack, he couldn't move a finger. He needed to call for help. At that moment, the cult members finally noticed the intruder and rushed after them, ordering the man to stop. Yugong thought this was a squad of soul revealers and Yaka pursuers. Believing these people would help him, he called out to them. However, he was suddenly interrupted by the voice of one of the squad leaders, who ordered them to run after him and kill him. Hearing this, he was shocked. Someone shouted that a reward would be given to whoever caught him. The members of the two squads obeyed the order and attacked from all sides. The stranger took out his sword and told the young cult leader that they needed to leave. Afterward, he swung the weapon several times, killing several of the pursuers. Yugong thought, how is he dealing with these soldiers so easily? One of the sect members pounced on the stranger from above, raising his sword over his head, wishing to strike him down. But the man deftly grabbed the sword, adjusted his grip, and swung his hand, delivering a fatal blow. Having rid himself of this opponent, he quickly moved to the next. Despite their fear, the soldiers continued to rush toward him. After dealing with another opponent, the stranger finally broke away from them, putting a sufficient distance between themselves and the pursuers. The commander of the squad of exposers of evil spirits, Yeoman Soen, shouted in frustration, demanding to know what they were doing. He warned that they couldn't allow Yugong to escape. Samun Megan waved his hand to stop them. The commander called out to him, exclaiming that they would regret letting him go. The leader of the Yaka pursuit squad, Pap and King, agreed, urging them to catch up immediately. Samun Megan, however, insisted that they had to kill Yugong. He warned that if he survived, the demon cult would face a great disaster. The heavenly demon had devised a grand plan, and Punan, who had kidnapped the young cult leader, held a special significance. He would deal with Yugong, dispose of his body, and gather all the elders. It was time to begin the inauguration ceremony for the 16th leader. Meanwhile, Punan skillfully leaped through the trees, moving further and further away from the village. Yugong, still furious, exclaimed in displeasure, "Only a day has passed. Who does he think he is to do this?" The man calmly replied that they would soon be in Shangi. He landed and placed Yugong on the ground, saying he would now remove the immobilization technique from him. Punan poked his fingers into Yugong's shoulders, and Yugong, while stretching his arm, wondered if he could really move again. The man then knelt in front of him and said, "A loyal servant greets his leader. I grew up only to protect you. My name is Punan." Yugong frowned, thinking, he grew up for me. Does this mean he was raised by my father? He asked if it was Samun Megan who had led the rebellion. Punan confirmed his words. Yugong's face darkened as he recalled the happy times he'd had with Samun as a child. He thought about how the person he had trusted eventually betrayed him. Surprisingly, this did not upset him at all. Instead, he smiled and thought, "This is amazing. If I want to become a leader, there is no other way." This was his chance to start anew. Yugong turned a nervous gaze to Punan and thought about what he should do with him. He needed to send him away somehow. Pointing a finger at him, he said that he chose the wrong person. "The leader of the cult is now Samun Megan, so let me go," he added. With a stern look, the man replied that he only served the heavenly demon Aura and him. He demanded that Yugong cancel his order. Noticing Punan's stern expression, Yugong nervously thought, "He isn't going to kill me, is he?" He frowned and exclaimed in displeasure, "How dare you contradict your leader? Are you mocking me?" He ordered Punan to leave. Suddenly, he stopped mid-sentence as Punan approached him with a furious expression. Instinctively, Yugong closed his eyes and covered his head with his hand. A loud slapping sound was heard, and Yugong fell to the ground in fear. Looking up, he saw Punan face, planting into a rock, and then banging his head against it repeatedly, saying that he should punish himself. One of the shards from the rock hit the young master on the head, and he exclaimed, "Did he hit himself?" He asked Punan to stop for a second and demanded to know what he was doing at this hour of the night. Punan replied that he would punish himself until his leader ordered him to stop. Becoming worried, Yugong ordered him to stop. Afterward, Punan walked away from the cliff, and Yugong tiredly thought, "Who did my father raise, anyway?" Grabbing his head in frustration, he said they first needed to find a place to stay. He suggested going down the mountain and wondered aloud how much money his father had left him. Punan replied that he hadn't taken anything, so they would have to spend the night in the mountains. Yugong was indignant and exclaimed, "You said you would help me." Punan bowed his head, apologized, and then looked at the huge crowd that had gathered in response to the noise. "It seems they've come to greet us," Punan said. The bandit leader stepped forward, asking with displeasure, "How dare you make noise in the green forest? Don't think you'll leave here alive." The rest of the bandits hiding in the trees aimed their bows at them. Yugong nervously clenched his fist, realizing this was the elite bandit squad of the green forest. He thought, Punan is an idiot. They're not here to greet us at all. First, he needed to avoid more trouble. He prepared to sincerely apologize, but Punan beat him to it, furiously shouting at the bandit leader to shut his mouth. "Do you even know who this guy is?" Punan's voice echoed through the forest, darkening Yugong's face. Grabbing Punan's hand, Yugong whispered urgently, "Do you even understand what you're doing? Apologize quickly." But it was too late. The bandit leader, furious, called Punan a pig and demanded, "Who do you think you are?" He ordered his fighters to attack. The archers in the trees fired several arrows, which sped toward them. Punan unsheathed the sword from his back, waved it with a grim expression, and blocked the attack, shouting, "I told you to shut your mouth." The bandit leader became nervous and thought, "Is this a wall of swords? This idiot isn't an ordinary person." Realizing the situation, the bandit leader ordered his soldiers to retreat, but suddenly he heard Punan's voice behind him. "I see your head is still intact," Punan said. He grabbed the bandit's head and twisted it sharply to the side. Yugong, horrified, yelled for Punan to stop. "Don't kill people so recklessly," he cried. Punan calmly replied, "I didn't kill him at all." Looking at the bandit's head, unnaturally twisted, Yugong exclaimed, "What kind of nonsense are you talking about?" Punan let go of the bandit, saying he was tired and suggesting they move on. They eventually passed through the green forest. Yugong, still in shock, asked, "Is he even still alive?" Feeling sick, he thought, "I've definitely gotten involved with a psycho." After some time, they reached the residence of the dark forest. Punan kicked the door open and rushed inside, where the most important person of the area was seated. Looking around, Punan remarked that the doors were so weak they didn't seem reliable. Yugong, displeased, told him not to be so rude. Punan immediately bowed and apologized to him. The people close to the head of the green forest said that he was too impudent. Mick turned to him with an awkward smile and apologized for rushing in so late, but suddenly fell silent upon seeing a woman of unprecedented beauty standing in front of him. It was Sun Yakan. He thought, "Is she really an angel who came down from heaven?" A slight blush appeared on his face, as he wondered how such a fragile-looking woman had ended up in the green forest among bandits. "Is she being held hostage?" he thought. Quietly, he called out to Punan and suggested they should save her. The woman approached him and said, "What a beautiful night. Then, stopping abruptly, she smiled and remarked, I was wondering, where did these idiots even come from? Yugang was slightly taken aback, not expecting such words from a lady. His faithful servant Punan immediately drew his sword and rushed toward her, shouting that she was being rude. She responded with a smile, waved her hand and ordered, Shut up and die. Several shurikens flew toward Punan. He reacted quickly, swinging his sword to cut one of them. However, the second shuriken was still in the air and ended up behind him. Sensing it, he jumped, dodging the blow, then rushed toward the shuriken and impaled it on the blade of his sword. Spinning in the air, he swung his weapon, sending the shuriken back toward Yakan. Startled, she fell to the floor to dodge the attack, but her weapon crashed into the wall, leaving a hole. Furious, she shouted, You idiot! Punan grabbed her by the head and said, That's enough. She laughed and asked mockingly, Do you think so? Meanwhile, the Green Forest bandits surrounded the young master and warned Punan to take his hands off the young lady, or they would slit that brat's throat. Seeing this, Punan became very worried. Yakan smirked and asked, Do you finally realize the whole situation? Maybe we can look at the contents of that boy's head together. The bandits laughed loudly. Mok, not wanting to tolerate this, called them idiots. He pulled small knives from under his sleeves and stabbed them into the backs of his offenders, using the silver spirit strike technique. The men who were hit began coughing violently before collapsing. The remaining bandits grew nervous and increased their distance from Mok. After landing, Mick pulled out his knives again and said, That wasn't so difficult. Punan, delighted, smiled and exclaimed, That was expected of the master. Such an impressive silver spirit strike. Yugang, however, was furious and shouted at Punan, I told you to apologize. Why didn't you listen to me? Realizing that this was an order from the leader of the demonic cult himself, Punan immediately fell to the floor with the woman, both hitting their foreheads in submission. Mick ordered him to stop, but the woman smirked and remarked, You're worse than a bunch of bandits. Usually I don't back down, but you two are something else. The rest of the people present laughed loudly. Yugang and his servant turned their gazes to her. Punan clenched his fist, and this time, the young master didn't stop him. A loud scream echoed through the room. After such a busy day, Mick finally went to rest, soaking tiredly in a hot bath. He said that Zhonggu was such an unpredictable place. This woman, no young lady, was constantly swearing, so he hoped that this was their last meeting. He felt like he had been in hell. After finishing his bath, he got dressed and headed to his room, thinking about how much had happened that night. He just wanted to rest. He didn't think she would so kindly give him her room. Upon entering, he thought he didn't expect much from such a small residence, but surprisingly, it had everything he needed. His gaze fell on a beautiful painting and an aroma candle to calm his soul and body. He then fell onto the soft bed with pleasure and said, This is what happiness looks like. He spread his arms to the sides and suddenly felt something. Turning his gaze, he saw an angry young lady next to him, wrapped in a blanket and tied with ropes. He immediately jumped out of bed and loudly called out to Punan. When Punan entered the room, he asked if his master had called him. The young master pointed at the bed and asked if this was the right way to treat a young lady. Punan replied, saying he liked her and would do whatever his master wanted. Yugang replied excitedly that he didn't need anything. He thought she was pretty until she started swearing. The woman began hissing through her teeth, saying he had a pretty face while he cursed in his mind, thinking, Is she serious? He shouted, Enough, and ordered Punan to untie her. Freed from the ropes, she stretched her neck and sighed, saying, Finally, I'm free. Yugang apologized to her and introduced himself, asking for her name. She gave her name and asked if he was some noble idiot's offspring. He remained silent, spread a blanket on the floor, and thought, all she knows how to do is swear. He then said, I'm tired. Let's go to bed, she agreed with a slight blush on her face, taking off her outer garment, and said there was no point in wasting time. Noticing this, he immediately ordered her to get up, exclaiming that they would sleep separately, as he was too tired. She threw a disappointed look at him and said he looked like a decent man. Are you impotent or something? She asked. Her words made him very angry. He walked toward her while she smiled maliciously, thinking, the fish has taken the bait. I'll take advantage of his carelessness and kill him. He approached her from behind and reached for her belt. She laughed triumphantly in her thoughts, but when he grabbed her, she was very surprised. He knocked her over and furiously exclaimed, How dare you call me impotent? He smashed her head through the floor, then threw her out of the residence, shouting at her to get lost. Outside, Punan, who was on duty, laughed and said, This is expected of the master. Still unable to fall asleep, Yugong went to the waterfall and settled on one of the rocks. Thinking aloud, he said it looked like he wouldn't be able to get enough sleep. Are there only psychos living here? And the most dangerous of them is Punan. This idiot easily repelled all the attacks. While reflecting, he noticed a fish jump out of the water. He immediately reacted, sending his knife flying but missing. He swung his finger to the side, watching his reflection in the water. Pointing the knife at the fish again, he killed it and thought, if Punan stays in Zhonggu with such abilities, then without a doubt, a terrible death awaits him. The one who could kill me at any moment is punning. Even the cult members want me dead. He clenched his fist in anger and glared at his reflection. Suddenly, he saw a tree in the water's reflection, with someone hiding behind it. He immediately turned around, but the person hid behind the bushes. Did they just disappear? He thought. He moved toward the shore, and hearing the wind behind him, he took out a knife. Realizing someone was approaching, he grew nervous. However, it turned out to be Punan. Punan said it was getting cold and invited him to go back inside. Yugong fell to the ground in relief and asked, So it was you? His hands trembled as he wondered why he had been so scared. He asked Punan to sit next to him. Punan replied that, with his permission, he would remain standing. Mick asked him again to sit down, saying he had something to ask. Punan silently complied. Yugong said, My father never allowed me to learn the basic palm strike techniques. The only martial art I know is the silver spirit strike. Yet, he still appointed me as the leader of the demon cult. What was the meaning of that? What was my father up to? His servant replied, The silver spirit strike is an inherited technique and possesses tremendous internal power. But with it alone, you wouldn't be able to subjugate Zhonggu, much less lead the demon cult. Yugong, frustrated, asked, Then why did my father only allow me to learn the silver spirit strike? Answer me. Puong Cheon lowered his gaze and replied that it was because Mick had to become the greatest martial artist. Mick suddenly stood up and waved his hand, exclaiming, What kind of nonsense is this? Do you really think that with my current strength I can become the strongest in Zhonggu? Puong Cheon replied that what Mak was looking for didn't exist within the demon cult. It isn't time yet, so that's all I can tell you, he said. The young master gritted his teeth and called him an idiot. Puong Cheon asked him to go inside and rest, explaining that they would have to go deeper into the green forest in the morning. Mak asked, What are you talking about? Why would we go there? Puong Cheon replied, To conquer the world. Yugong lost all patience at these words and attacked him with his fists, exclaiming, What the hell are you talking about? But as soon as he struck, his body trembled, and he felt intense pain. He thought, This is nonsense. I didn't even want to be the leader of the demon cult, let alone conquer the world. Did anyone even ask for my opinion? Morning came, and they set off in a carriage. Sitting inside, Mick thought that since they were now heading to the main base of the Green Forest, he really didn't care about Punchin's desires. Yakan, who was sitting opposite him, asked, "Why did you bring me along?" Looking at her battered face, he thought it looked like Punchin had dragged her here. When he didn't answer, she started getting angry and demanded that he say something already. He crossed his arms over his chest and remained silent. She exclaimed, "These bastards covet their treasures, and now they want my body too. You should first rise to the level of the leader of the demonic cult and then think about sitting at the same table as me." Her words began to irritate him. She added, "If you were the successor to the head, I might think about it, but not with you at all. So just sit where you belong." Not wanting to endure this any longer, Yugong looked out the window and called to Punchin in displeasure. "What is wrong?" Punchin asked. Yugong shouted, "I can't stand it anymore. We need to leave her right here." Carriage stopped immediately. Punchin looked inside while Yakan twisted her finger at her temple, exclaiming, "Does he think that if they take me with them, I'll immediately marry him? Is he completely stupid? And his master is also stupid." She immediately fell silent as she felt Punchin's hand squeeze her neck and his other hand grab her head. A loud crunch was heard. Mick looked at her twisted head in shock. His servant calmly said, "She won't make another sound." "Furious," Yugong replied. "This is not the way to handle things. Are you forcing her on me now or something?" He thought, "Am I really going to bang my head on the ground again because of this rude brat? She deserves no mercy this time." But when Punchin bowed his head and apologized for his impudence, Mak was surprised. Punchin then declared, "I have decided to become your teacher from today on." Yugong remembered their conversation last night and was shocked, thinking, "Is it because of what I said yesterday?" After that, his new teacher sat down, took the reins, and forced the horses to continue moving. Mick thought Punchin was a scoundrel. Turning his gaze to Yakan, he wondered if Punchin planned to put her head back in place. She looked so much like a ghost, he thought. 2 days later, they arrived at the Flower Moon Pavilion and went into one of the restaurants. After taking a seat, Yugong, with a gloomy expression, thought, "I'm so tired. Thank the gods he put her head back in place as soon as we arrived here." When they had gotten out of the carriage earlier, he had pointed at the young lady and said they didn't need any extra attention. Punchin, understanding him, had put her head back in place. His thoughts were interrupted by the voice of the servant who brought them food. Looking at the meal, Mick thought, "It's been a long time since I've eaten such good food. But this servant seems too suspicious." The man smiled nervously and wished them a pleasant appetite. Mick decided not to dwell on his behavior and convinced himself that it just seemed that way because of his current environment. He decided to start eating quickly and smiled, but suddenly, Punchin grabbed the man by the hand and, with a gloomy expression, asked how long he had been working there. The servant nervously answered that it had been 3 years. Punchin then asked if he was always so nervous when serving food. The man swallowed hard and decided to remain silent. Yugong placed his chopsticks on the table with displeasure and asked Punchin why he was doing this. "He hasn't done anything," he said. The restaurant worker thanked the young master and admitted, "To be honest, the young lady is so beautiful that I couldn't help but get nervous." She smiled and said he had good taste. After that, the Mick suggested they start eating and smiled, thinking he could finally enjoy his meal. However, Yakan suddenly got angry for some reason. He asked her, "What's wrong with you?" With a gloomy expression, she asked, "Are we some kind of poor people to them?" He didn't understand what she meant until she overturned the table in a rage, exclaiming, "They brought 7 dumplings to others, but only 6 to us." All the food scattered. A plate fell on Yugong's head, and the dumplings landed on Punchin. The young master, unable to enjoy his meal, snapped his chopsticks in anger and said Punchin's name. Punchin immediately stood up and held his hands out to Yakan's head, while she yelled at the owner to close the stupid establishment, or she was going to kill him. A loud crunching sound was heard as Punchin twisted her head back in place. Meanwhile, the mech headed toward the cafe's exit. Punchin, taking the young lady by the arm, apologized to him. At that moment, she continued exclaiming that she was going to kill everyone there. The other customers stared at them in surprise, puzzled by the odd position of Yakan's head. They began wondering how such a thing was even possible. One of the servants caught up with Yugang and grabbed his shoulder, demanding payment for the food. Yugang immediately turned around and shouted angrily, "You only brought us 6 dumplings!" By evening, loud bangs could be heard from one of the houses. Yugang kicked the leader of the demon cult's assassination squad, Huk Shimu, in the stomach and asked, "Couldn't you think of anything better than bribing the servants?" Spitting out blood, Huk Shimu apologized, saying he didn't think the girl would overturn the table. He knelt before Yugang, begged for another chance, and called him a shining child before quickly correcting himself by calling him uncle. Yugang gritted his teeth, thinking he still couldn't get used to the sight of Shimu's face. How could a man over 60 look like that? Shimu had this body because of a curse he received after tasting human flesh as a child. If he begged for mercy after failing, Yugang thought he would kill him without hesitation. With that in mind, Yugang said, "This is your last chance. Since we're related, I'll give you one more opportunity. Make sure everything goes smoothly." After that, Shimu and his squad headed toward the city. He thought that the Black Shadow squad would lure Punchin far away, while the twin demons, I and I, would deal with the cult leader alongside him. As they perched on rooftops, Shimu raised his hand, motioning for them to stop. He peered into a window where Yugang was sitting, unsuspecting. One of the squad members took out an arrow, pulled it on the bowstring, and their commander thought, "This is our last chance." At the same time, Mc looked at the happy passers-by below and thought, "There are so many people on the streets. I wish I could enjoy such freedom." Yakan approached him and, calling him an idiot, asked if he should go to bed already. His face darkened as he thought, reality is too harsh. He then insulted Punchin, blaming him for forcing him to share a room with this crazy woman. She exclaimed, "My skin will get dull if I stay up late. Will you take responsibility?" Sighing, he agreed to go to bed. As he began closing the window shutters, the whistle of an arrow was heard. It flew past Yugang and Yakan, piercing the wall. They turned around in confusion, but then the same whistle was heard again, this time followed by many more arrows. Yakan immediately reacted and jumped, while the young master ducked. The young lady screamed in horror, "I almost died! What kind of idiot is shooting at me?" Gritting his teeth, he remained silent in response to her accusations. Punchin, who appeared in the window opening, called out to the master and worriedly asked if he was okay. Several arrows pierced his back, but the mage said he was fine and ordered him to deal with the enemies. Ignoring the arrows, Punchin obeyed the order. Then he poked his fingers into the mage's shoulders, paralyzing him again. Picking him up, Punchin leaned out of the window. His master exclaimed that he told him to subdue the enemies, not carry him. Punchin jumped out of the window, apologizing, and said he couldn't leave him in such a dangerous place. The Mac, shocked, exclaimed, "How can you say such a thing while dragging me into enemy territory?" Meanwhile, Yakan remained in the room and at the window asking, "What about me?" Breaking through the enemies, Punchin approached the forest and, turning his gaze to the side, noticed one of the opponents and killed him. Another squad member pounced on him from above, but Punchin, noticing this, delivered a crushing blow that cut through the trees around him. The remaining squad members started running away. One of them shouted that Punchin was coming their way, and his comrade ordered him to lure Punchin as far away as possible so that Master Huk Shimu could take care of the young cult leader. Before the comrade could finish speaking, he saw Punchin carrying Yugang and froze in shock. Punchin, calling them impudent, waved his sword and shouted, "Where are you looking?" The squad member, confused about why Puong Cheon brought the young leader with him, was killed shortly after. Meanwhile, Shimu entered the room where Yugang was supposed to be. Seeing no one except Yakan, he asked in shock, "Did Puong Cheon leave?" Yakan confirmed his words and asked, "Who are you anyway?" Upon hearing the news, Shimu's face darkened, and he muttered that they had failed again. Ian and Yang, remembering their commander's warning, looked at each other nervously. They rushed to the window, but Shimu said there was no point in running. Using a demonic technique, he swung his hand and killed them. Their bodies immediately fell to the floor. Hugging his own neck, Shimu muttered that they were already dead anyway. Then, he committed suicide, causing Yakan to scream in fear. She poked him several times with her finger and asked, "Is this a joke, or is he really dead?" After checking and confirming he was dead, she exclaimed, "What kind of psychos are these? Do cult followers say goodbye to life so easily?" She noticed movement outside the window. Puong Cheon returned to the room, placed the young master on the floor, and deactivated his technique. Wiping the blood from his face, Yugang asked irritably, "Did you bathe me in a bath of blood on purpose?" Seeing the 3 corpses on the floor, Yugang was slightly surprised and asked, "What's wrong with them?" Puong Cheon looked at the corpses and said that Hak Shimu and the twin demons, Ian and Yang, had been there. The mech turned to Yakan and asked what had happened. Excitedly, she replied that she did nothing. Shimu said their plan had failed and then killed everyone. Crossing his arms over his chest, Yugang said discontentedly, "Now I understand why you're still alive." She exclaimed, "I didn't even have time to squeak before they died. How could you leave me alone in such a place?" She called out to Puong Cheon and asked, "Can you hear me? Was it so difficult to take me with you? One day I'll stab you in the back." Puong Cheon ignored her entirely, taking out a small bottle and pouring its contents onto the corpses. They immediately began to melt, leaving dark marks on the floor. Hiding her horror behind a smile, Yakan praised him, saying, "You got rid of the bodies so easily." Puong Cheon turned to Yugang and said, "It would be better if we left now." Yugang agreed. Behind them, Yakan clenched her fist happily as they exited the room. The corpses completely melted away, leaving no trace of what had happened. Soon, they were back on the road. "Riding along the edge of a cliff," Yakan remarked. "A person never knows what they'll encounter in Exiong, right? I never thought I'd get used to having my neck broken." She knocked on the carriage and exclaimed, "A 4-day journey without a bath is killing me. It smells so bad. We need to stop. I could use the young master's brain as soap. What do you say to that?" Closing his eyes, the mech thought she was clearly not very sane, but today she was especially unbearable. Still, she was right. They hadn't washed in days. He called out to Puong Cheon and ordered him to head toward the stream. Puong Cheon asked him to be patient a little longer. He replied with displeasure that Puong Cheon was saying that because he was sitting outside. He told him to turn the carriage around immediately. After his words, the carriage stopped and Puong Cheon asked someone to introduce themselves. Yugang wondered what was going on, looked out of the carriage and asked, "What's happening?" The people they met on the road apologized, and a man introduced himself as Sang Pil W, the head of a martial arts academy in Zan. He pointed to the broken wheel of a nearby carriage and explained that his young lady's carriage had broken down. Could they please help? Puong Cheon was about to draw his sword, but the mech ordered him not to rush and to offer a helping hand instead. Judging by the man's tiny amount of chai, the mech assumed it was a third-rate martial arts academy. Puong Cheon obeyed the order, lifted the damaged carriage, and threw it off the cliff along with the horses. Dusting off his hands, he remarked that if they wanted horse meat, they could go down and get it. Yugang slapped his head in shock and thought, "He's a crazy idiot." Sang PW looked at him and asked if it wouldn't be too much trouble to give the young lady a ride. The young master smiled and agreed, saying he could also get into the carriage. The girl introduced herself as Chu Soin and thanked him with a smile for his help. He offered her a seat. As soon as she entered the carriage, she saw Yakan and screamed loudly in horror. She almost lost her balance, but the maid caught her in time and reassured her, "Don't be afraid. She's human." She thanked him for his help, and once they sat down, they continued their journey. Yakan remarked that Soin looked good and must have made many men cry. Soin replied that it wasn't true. Yakan noted that Soin had her own escort and must be from some noble family, but Soin refuted her words. Turning to the window with displeasure, Yakan called her boring trash and accused her of being afraid. Yugang thought it would be strange if she wasn't scared. How can I dilute this terrible atmosphere? He wondered. Suddenly, Soin called him a young cult leader. He immediately turned his gaze to her, thinking, is this girl a member of the assassin squad sent by the cult? Looking at her suspiciously, he wondered what those idiots were up to this time. Soin glanced at him sideways and he asked, "Were you sent to kill me?" She didn't understand what he was talking about and tried to respond, but at that moment, Poong Cheon broke through the wall of the carriage and shouted that she was dangerous. He grabbed her head, causing her to clench her teeth in pain. Moments later, she lost consciousness and blood flowed from her mouth. Poong Cheon declared that she was dead. Yugang asked, "Did she take poison?" Poong Cheon confirmed it, explaining that poison took less time than pressing on a vital point. Meanwhile, Sangpil W did the same. Yakan, perplexed, pointed her finger at them and shouted, "Who are they? Anyway, why is everyone around us dying?" Poong Cheon turned his gaze to her and she screamed, "Why should they lose their lives because of us?" He immediately hit her on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. Apologizing to his master, Poong Cheon said it was his fault for not knocking her out earlier. Yugang replied that he didn't care about that. "What's up with Sangpil W?" he asked. Poong Cheon explained that he had telepathically asked Sangpil W 2 questions: which demon cult squad he was from and who was in charge of the operation. Sangpil W's expression changed in a second, and before he could move a finger, he killed himself. The Mick thought it was impressive how he cornered him and caught him. He may be weird, but he's smart, Yugang reflected. Poong Cheon bowed to him, his loyal servant unwavering in his devotion. He said that if they were able to track him without him knowing, then he was afraid someone had marked him with the 1000M scent. Yugang was surprised when he heard this. The 1000M scent is a scent that can only be sensed by those who have mastered the divine art of tracking. Traces of the 1000M scent appear after being marked, so the marked person does not notice anything. It is an unrivaled tracking method. He said that it made sense and asked if there was a way to remove the mark. He replied that they could burn it away with the heat of the scorching sun, but it might cause him great pain for a moment. Yugang replied that it was okay. He could handle it, so let him begin. Poong Cheon asked him to sit down and cross his legs. Then, he brought his hand to his head and said that he was feeling the energy flow. He immediately opened his eyes, and a sharp pain pierced his body, causing him to scream loudly. A bright light burst out of the carriage windows. When everything died down, smoke began to come out of the young master's body. He caught his breath and thought that he would never do this again. Thank the gods that it lasted only a moment. But contrary to his expectations, Poong Cheon brought his hand to his head again, and a sharp pain pierced his body. He screamed, saying that he had said it would be done quickly. Poong Cheon replied with a smile that it would only take 15 minutes. Almost dying from such excruciating pain, Yugang looked at Poong Cheon's smile and thought, "Kind of idiot is this? He's enjoying this, right?" Meanwhile, the shining child found 2 corpses and asked, "What's wrong?" "The scent of 1,000 miles is gone." He clenched his fists in rage and said, "Once I see them, they will become corpses. The cult leader's orders were wrong from the beginning. He should have just killed that boy, and all he had to do was ensure Du Gang's freedom. He smashed a rock with his foot in rage and exclaimed, "Since when did the demon cult become so kind-hearted?" But he couldn't do anything about it when the order had already been given. He called out to Hapin, who immediately appeared behind him. Heen poured the liquid from the vial onto his hand and said that he had marked himself with the scent of 1,000 miles. He would personally pursue the young cult leader. Let him go to the Shawnee branch, report the situation, and call for reinforcements. Once he's done, let him return to the cult. Tin looked up at him and, understanding what this meant, wanted to object, but the shining child ordered him not to argue. When the time comes, you'll go to the afterlife with Poong Cheon. You'll take care of him and convey the will of the cult leader to Yu Gang. In the meantime, they continued on their way. Yu Gang looked down and smiled slightly, thinking that he had burned everything because of this scoundrel. He had not even listened to her. He wondered what she wanted to say. Yakan asked with a smile what he was thinking about, letting him just not tell her that he was scared. She laughed loudly and said, "That's so cute. Don't be shy. Tell me everything." She began to mock him, calling him a poor baby, which made him angry. He shouted, "Does she not care about others at all? Let her look at herself. Does she need a head on her shoulders only for beauty?" She told him, with an irritated smile, to say whatever he wanted, adding that she didn't care. Then she started yelling and asked if he wanted her to whine and beg him for mercy. He wanted to take a moment to hold her while she cried. He answered in surprise that he hadn't meant that at all, and she turned away from him, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring out the window with displeasure. He noticed that she was shaking all over and wondered if she really wanted to distract herself in this way. He mentally apologized to her and said that he shouldn't have said that. She looked at him and asked why he didn't say that out loud. He answered that it was all because of her, because she knew that he didn't know how to apologize. She smirked and asked what he was thinking about. He answered that he was thinking about his friend. His friend had a pretty strong family. The thing is, his uncle had started a rebellion. His friend managed to escape with the help of a trusted subordinate, but the elite soldiers sent by his uncle were trying to kill him. They wanted to eliminate him, because a lot depended on him, but he thought they wanted to tell him something. Yakan thought about it and pointed her finger at him, saying that, according to her brilliant judgment, it seemed like they were hinting that they would not harm him if he lived a quiet life. He remained silent and thought about it deeply, wondering if that was really true. Elite soldiers of a demonic cult intimidating their prey. That couldn't be true. What was she trying to tell him? Then he remembered how she hadn't understood what he was talking about at all when he asked her, and realized that they had no intention of doing that. At that very moment, Punan opened the door and said that he needed to rest, hiding the dagger in his sleeve. Mick agreed and thought that now that he knew their goal, he had nothing to be afraid of. He got out of the carriage and apologized to Punan in his mind, thinking that for the sake of the freedom he desired, he was leaving. The first thing they did was go to the restaurant, and when the food was brought to them, Yakan was very happy and said that it had been so long. Punan must have grown up. She looked at the food and then at him several times, asking if he didn't give it to those idiots. Yu Gang asked the servant to wait, then turned his gaze to the big table and asked who kind of warriors were sitting there. The servant replied that they were the Cloud Tiger clan. All their warriors were famous for their skills in martial arts, but he shouldn't worry. They wouldn't touch them unless, of course, they started a fight first. Mick replied that he understood, and then thought that if they were really that skilled in martial arts, they would be the perfect replacement for Punan. After inflicting serious injuries on him with his spirit power, he would deliberately insult their clan and run away, leaving Punan as bait. The Cloud Tiger clan would immediately attack him. His spirit power could even destroy rocks, but he was strong, so he would recover quickly. He turned his gaze to Punan, who had already started eating, and mentally apologized to him, asking him not to hold a grudge against him. Then he took out a knife from his sleeve and swung it. After that, his eyes widened in surprise, and Yakan dropped a piece of food from her mouth in shock. His knife did not penetrate Punan's body, and he thought, I cannot injure him. This is very bad. Punan immediately turned his gaze to him and called out ominously. He became very nervous and wondered what was wrong with his body. He wanted to say that he did it by accident, but Punan seemed to not understand anything and asked if he called him. This made Yakan and the young master very surprised. He wondered, did he call me? Yakan was displeased and said that he had gone crazy. She suddenly rose from her chair and slammed her palms on the table, exclaiming that she was very angry now. She pointed at the members of the Cloud Tiger clan and very worriedly told her servant to look at them. How dare they wear swords in my presence? I can't look at this. I really want to teach them manners. They heard her words and immediately took out their swords, asking, Is this what you're telling us? Punan stood up from the table and reached for his sword, saying that since his master used his spirit to ask for this, he didn't even know how angry they made him. Yakan quickly moved the table to the side so they wouldn't touch the food, and Yugang excitedly asked him not to kill anyone, just to teach them a lesson. I won't forgive you if even one person dies. Punan understood his order, and the Cloud Tiger clan members pounced on him, shouting that it looked like the idiots needed to be killed first to make them come to their senses. Punan kicked off the ground and ran towards them, grabbing 2 men and smashing their heads into the floor. The rest of the cult members were very surprised. Meanwhile, the Mac, heading for the exit, thought that this was his chance. It was time to run. He ran out of the restaurant, and while he heard a rumble behind him, he thought that the sacrifice of the Cloud Tiger clan was not in vain. Climbing up to the rooftops and quickly moving around the city, he realized that even though it would exhaust his che, he needed to run as far as possible. While they distracted Punan, he noticed the city gate ahead and rejoiced at the sight of freedom, exclaiming how wonderful it was. Suddenly, Punan's voice was heard behind him, smiling and saying that it was indeed a wonderful practice of the skill of lightness. From his unexpected appearance, Yugang stumbled and almost fell, but his servant caught him in time. Yugang asked how Punan had arrived so quickly, and if he had disobeyed his order. The man hesitated to answer, and his gaze became serious, after which he invited Yugang to follow him. When they returned, Yugang saw many warriors in front of him bowing and chanting, Long live the eternal heavens. Punan smiled contentedly and said they were desperately trying to beg for forgiveness. The young master's face darkened, and he gritted his teeth in anger, thinking that he had believed in them. But in the end, he only received betrayal and empty praises of long live, the eternal heavens. One of the clansmen looked at him angrily, thinking, Why are they even worshipping such a brat? I'll take the chance and attack. However, Yugang suddenly grabbed the man's head, slammed him to the ground, and shouted that there was no forgiveness for them. After that, he began to beat up the others. Punan laughed loudly, saying that it was impressive. Yugang, meanwhile, with tears in his eyes, thought that he would kill them all. A new day dawned, and as they set off again, the young master didn't know what to do. In front of the demon cult's elite, his spirit was weak. Would he really be able to escape Punan's control? Yakan called out to him in her mind, and he turned his attention to her. She asked if he was planning on killing Punan. He replied that he didn't want to kill him. What difference would it make? His blade couldn't even scratch him. She asked if that was because it was trash. Yugang looked at her with a confident gaze, took out a knife from his sleeve, aimed, and then threw it, cutting off one of the blinds. She was very surprised and asked, So Punan isn't an unkillable monster? Keeping such an idiot by his side is incredible. He frowned and asked what she meant by that. She smirked and said, You want to escape from him, right? I can lend you a helping hand. He asked, suspiciously, how she planned to help him. She replied that she had a very interesting toy. Showing him a pill, she asked with a sly smile what he thought of it. Did he want to play? He frowned and said it looked suspicious. What is this? He asked. She giggled and replied that the pill was capable of turning one's insides out. Severe diarrhea could be expected within 15 minutes of taking it. Pointing at himself in shock, he asked, "Are you suggesting I eat this?" She replied, "That would be an amazing sight. But this pill is for me. Listen carefully. After I eat the pill, tell Punan that I might run away using the excuse of going to the toilet, so he should keep a close eye on me. While he's distracted, we'll go as far as possible, and you will run away. During this time, while Punan is looking for you, I will drag out the process for an hour." Yugang was slightly surprised and said he was, of course, very grateful, but now he felt a little awkward. She smiled widely and told him not to worry. Together, they would show Punan what they were capable of. He agreed to her offer, thanked her with a grin, and she said that since he was happy, the drink was on him. As soon as she swallowed the pill, she let out a loud scream. Covered in cold sweat, clutching her stomach, she called out to Punan, saying that everything inside her was burning, and begged him to stop the carriage. Finding this suspicious, Punan stopped, which made both of them very happy. However, nothing happened, and an oppressive atmosphere settled in. After a few seconds of silence, Punan made the horses move again and asked discontentedly, "What are you two planning? Does she think he will fall for this?" They both froze in shock, and the Mick yelled that she was really sick and begged him to let them out. The man covered his eyes and told the Mick not to fall for her tricks. Yugang yelled that he didn't get it. She was really sick, and Punan needed to let them out now. He started banging on the carriage and calling him an idiot, asking who he was talking to. "Let us out right now," he shouted. But Punan didn't stop and didn't answer. Yakan, covered in sweat with a gloomy expression and tears in her eyes, looked up at Yugang. He looked at her in horror, then turned away and clenched his teeth, as if silently admitting he couldn't do anything about it. She got really angry, spat saliva, and yelled, "You idiot! Come here right now!" Finally, the pill in her stomach completely dissolved, and she screamed loudly. Punan, hearing suspicious sounds, immediately stopped and looked into the carriage. Seeing what was happening inside, he grabbed his master and ran with him toward the forest, while a stench came out of all the windows and doors of the carriage along with women's screams. As they ran, Punan apologized to the mech, saying he didn't think she'd have an accident. After landing, he said they must endure such difficulties to become the greatest masters. The young master, almost burning with rage, turned to him and exclaimed, "Did I really have to smell that for this?" Punan began looking around for a place to punish himself. Then, without warning, he smashed his head through a tree trunk and apologized, saying he was wrong. He continued banging his head against all the trees, while Yugang let out a loud, tortured scream, shouting that this was really killing him. In the end, they changed carriages and continued on their way. Yakan's face reflected all the horror she had experienced. The mock, afraid to look at her, thought she seemed to have been through hell. Well, no wonder she squeezed out so much, he mused. Suddenly, she mentally suggested that they do it again. He looked at her in surprise, after which she threw another pill into her mouth. He called out to her, asking why she was trying so hard for him. She loudly ordered him to shut up and exclaimed madly, "The Song family does not give up so easily." Her stomach growled loudly, and she screamed in pain again. This time, Punan immediately stopped and opened the doors. Yugang, thinking he couldn't let her sacrifice go to waste, excitedly called out to the servant and ordered him to quickly take her away. But this time, the man decided to act differently. He swung his sword, cutting through the wall of the carriage next to Yakan, and said in a rage, "This can't go on like this. I have to kill her." Yakan and Yugang opened their mouths in shock. The latter exclaimed, "Is it her fault that she poops more than others? Take her to the bushes right now." Punan began approaching them threateningly, causing Yakan to tremble in fear. A rumbling sound came from her stomach again, and the man flinched. The Mc noticed this and thought it was his chance. He shouted, "Did you decide to disobey me again?" Punan's hand holding the sword immediately dropped, and he bowed, apologizing. Then he grabbed Yakan and headed into the forest. Yugang ran out of the carriage and shouted that the stench would be terrible, so he had to take her away and make sure she didn't escape. Punan responded, shouting that he understood. The young master, after waiting for them to disappear, turned around, jumped onto the carriage, and moved toward the trees. He began running, thinking that he would never forget her sacrifice. Realizing that if he used the skill of lightness, Punan would catch him in the blink of an eye, he descended to the ground and thought, "This is the best place to hide." He began collecting leaves into a pile, then hid under it. Soon, Punan began looking for him, reaching the area nearby. A pile of leaves. Punan said that his master's tracks ended there and wondered where he could have gone. He couldn't just abandon the cult. He was definitely kidnapped. Probably when practicing the skill of lightness. Saying he would never forgive the kidnappers, Punan continued searching. Yugang, listening carefully to his surroundings, thought that Punan had left. However, it was better for him not to move for now. He began to count, and soon evening came. In the end, he counted to 20,000 and came out of his hiding place, smiling and saying, "Now he's definitely gone. I'm finally free." But it turned out Punan had been standing nearby all this time, waiting. Seeing him, the man got very scared. Trying to find words to justify himself, he began mumbling something. Punan approached him and asked, "So you've already learned the technique of stealth?" Nervously, Yugang confirmed his words and said that Jianghu was such a scary place. He added that, as Punan could see, he had improved his tracking technique, right? Dusting himself off, he said that if they were done, they should go. Then he headed toward the carriage, laughing nervously, saying they had a long way to go. But Punan did not hurry to follow him. He called out, making Yugang turn around, then sternly told him to bow his head. Yugang was very surprised. Punan explained that the heavenly demon Aura had ordered him to make Yugang the strongest leader, and it was unacceptable for him to try to escape his destiny. This is the third time, Yugang thought. So, he was playing dumb all this time. Excitedly, Yugang pointed his finger at him and asked, "Are you trying to control me?" Punan replied that a great master must be confident in himself. "Bow your head," he demanded. Yugang exclaimed in anger, "What kind of nonsense are you talking about? I'm your master." Punan, getting angrier, repeated his demand. Yugang, now nervous and frustrated, got really angry and called Punan an idiot before putting his forehead on the ground. "I would done it anyway," he grumbled. Punan asked him to repeat after him. "I, the leader of a demonic cult, am not afraid of anything. Let him start." Yugang started saying the words. Punan exclaimed that he couldn't hear him and told him to say it again. Cursing loudly, Yugang repeated it, but Punan told him to leave out the unnecessary words and continue. Sweating, Yugang shouted that he was invincible and nothing scared him. Punan told him to start over. Gritting his teeth in rage, Yugang shouted, "I am the leader of a demonic cult." Only at night did they continue on their way. Yugang rubbed his chin in confusion, wondering how much longer he would have to endure Punan's antics. He looked up at Yakan, who was lying motionless on the seat, and thought that Punan had probably paralyzed her again. A lot had happened in the past couple of hours, and Yakan had gotten it pretty bad too. Suddenly, Punan said that a carriage with a broken wheel was blocking their way. They met a girl and her guard named Youngwan, who asked them for help. Muk looked out of the carriage and thought, "Is it them again? These idiots from the demon cult are so banal." He told Punan that they were acting according to plan. Punan, obeying his order, threw the broken carriage off a cliff. Young Wan asked Yu Gang to give his lady aid. Waving his hand dismissively, Yu Gang told him to climb forward. Then, the lady entered the carriage. She awkwardly introduced herself, saying her name was Wang Yuk and asking him to take care of her. He smirked at her words and thought that she was being so flirtatious it was making him feel awkward. Turning to her in his thoughts, he ordered her to sit quietly if she wanted to go home. Her expression immediately changed and she shuddered in fear. He said she didn't have to waste her life. She mentally replied that if she were afraid of death, she wouldn't have interfered. He called it stupid and wondered why Punan had let her in. He realized Punan had done it to kindle the flame of hope, to make them think everything was going according to plan, and then extinguish it in the blink of an eye. She looked down and replied that she didn't care. Calling her stupid again, he remarked that he already knew what Sami and Megan wanted. She interrupted him, looking resolutely into his eyes, and said she had agreed to this to confess her love to him, even if it meant death. Mok was taken aback and became very nervous, thinking this couldn't be happening. He mentally asked, "What kind of nonsense is she talking about? What kind of love is this?" His words offended her. She jumped up from her seat, loudly shouting, "How dare you call my love nonsense? You're just an idiot." The young master didn't understand what was happening and began to suspect she might not be connected to the cult at all. He asked who she was. She didn't answer and slapped him on the cheek, shouting, "How dare you look down on my feelings?" Yu Gang was very surprised by her actions and, at first, didn't even understand what had happened. Yakan, who had been watching them the whole time, laughed and called him a loser. The horses reared from the sudden stop, and Punan, grabbing the lady's guard by the throat, looked into the carriage and worriedly asked what was going on. Yu Gang became worried, thinking it was all a misunderstanding and that Punan couldn't kill her. He replied that everything was fine and told Punan to forget about it. However, Punan noticed the red mark on Yu Gang's cheek from the slap and couldn't leave it so easily. "I'm too magnanimous," he said. "How dare she touch your noble body?" He climbed. Punan climbed into the carriage threateningly. Looking at the lady with a gloomy expression, he said that even her death would not make up for this act. Yu clenched her teeth, becoming very nervous, then waved her hand and threw something at him, shouting that he was a scoundrel. However, he covered himself with the body of her guard, and she angrily added that he was a vile idiot. After that, she rushed at him, wishing him death, but as soon as her foot landed, Punan noticed it. He kicked the floor, making her immediately lose her balance. Nervously, she thought that as soon as she put her foot down, he had lifted the floor of the carriage. He immediately grabbed her by the neck and pressed her to the floor. A loud wheeze came out of her mouth as he reached for the sword behind his back. Yu Gang noticed this and became worried. Just as Punan swung the sword, Yu Gang ordered him to stop. The blade froze, rising just a few centimeters from her head. He pleaded with him not to kill her, explaining it was just a misunderstanding and that he had only made a bad joke on her. Letting out a tense sigh, he asked Punan to put his sword away. Punan glared at Yuk for a moment before sheathing his sword. He bowed to his master, saying he would do as he wished. Yu Gang smiled and praised him, then ordered him to return. Meanwhile, Yuk grabbed her neck, coughing and trying to catch her breath. Punan got out of the carriage and was about to take his seat, causing the Mac to breathe a sigh of relief. But Punan suddenly stopped, remembering something. He turned back and climbed into the carriage, helping the lady up. The young master asked, "Did you forget something?" Without saying a word, Punan silently grabbed the girl's head and neck. Yu Gang, realizing what he was about to do, ordered him to stop. But it was too late. A loud crunching sound came from the carriage, and the girl screamed. They continued on their way. Yuk, with tears in her eyes, tried to turn her neck back into place, but nothing worked. Yakan, who was watching her attempts, smirked and said it was useless. "Punan is a master at this," she remarked. Yuk, immediately turned to them and asked, "Who are you anyway?" Yakan replied that she didn't know, but then reached into her inside pocket. She said she knew how to put Yuke's head back into place. Handing her 2 pills with a sly smirk, she told her to take them, claiming the effect would be instant. Mick immediately intervened, exclaiming, "Is she going to break our carriage again?" Yakan sighed in displeasure while Yuke felt uneasy, turning to the window. Yuka started crying loudly. Punan, furiously, ordered her to stop crying, threatening that if she cried even once more, he would kill her. Terrified, she shut up and turned her body to the window. Yakan told her not to take everything to heart. "If you listen to him," Yakan said, "he will return your head to its place." She smiled gently and added, "I've been through this many times myself." Little sister, and asked if it must be really hard for her, right? Realizing that she had been in the same situation, Yuke burst into tears and clung to her. She asked where they were going. Yakan answered, "To Mount Odi." Yakan then said it was a coincidence since they were going there too. Looking at them, Yugong thought he would never understand women. He then said he would talk to Punan about taking her with them. Yuke ignored him and hugged Yakan, saying it was a relief her little sister was here too. She was so excited because it was the first time she had encountered such a thing. Noticing Yakan did not react at all, Yuke looked up at her with a worried expression. Yakan coldly called her big sister and offered her to sit separately, claiming she was only 21 years old. Seeing this reaction, Yuke became very scared and began to cry again. Punan, unable to stand it any longer, hit the carriage with his elbow several times in rage and shouted that he had told them to shut up. He threatened to finish off the girl and turned to his master, asking for permission to kill her. Yakan told her big sister that she was not alone here. Yuki continued to cry, and Yugong looked up at the ceiling and muttered that it was such a mess. The next morning, they arrived at the mountain and stopped by the forest to continue walking. Mick asked if this was the same mountain, and his servant confirmed it. Yuke declared that her life was now in their hands. Yakan asked if this was the end of her journey. Was it? They didn't have to say goodbye, Yakan said. Yuke turned away from her and said she didn't want to answer. Yakan got very angry and, calling her a stupid girl, told her to keep her secrets to herself. The young master tiredly touched his head and, with a sigh, ordered Punan to return her neck to its place. Punan bowed slightly, approached Yuke, and she smiled, thinking she would finally leave. But at that very moment, warriors jumped out of the forest and surrounded them from all sides. One of them licked his blade and asked what they were doing on this mountain, saying it had such a beautiful landscape. Punan took a step to the side and turned around. The man, seeing the girl with the broken neck, froze in place and thought that he had soiled his pants. Another warrior turned to his comrade and said the girl seemed strange. He replied there was another one, and Yakan, realizing they were talking about her, immediately went to Yugong and asked who they were. He thought they were in the territory of the Green Forest. If even she didn't know, how could he know? That meant they weren't from here. Turning to Punan, he ordered him to get rid of them. Punan obeyed, bowing deeply, which made the warriors laugh. One of them mocked. It seems formality is in fashion these days. Does he imagine himself to be the leader of a demonic cult or something? Their words made Yugong angry, and he called out to his servant, asking how long he would stand there. Meanwhile, Punan carefully looked around as if he had noticed something, making Mick restless. Suddenly, a group of people in white robes emerged from the forest. The leader of the newcomers, addressing the enemies as the Black Dragon Squad, shouted, "Weren't your targets the bandits from the Green Forest? Don't you dare attack ordinary people." The Black Dragon Squad confirmed his words and said they were working overtime. Yugong thought to himself that the Black Dragon Squad was among the top 5. These guys in white clothes looked stern, But why make such a fuss when they were standing in the thick of things? The two groups of warriors pointed their swords at each other before rushing into combat. They met each other with a clash of blades. Punan turned to his master and said this was a good chance to observe and practice. It seemed there were some problems in the Green Forest. Yugong agreed, saying such commotion would definitely not have happened on Mount Wutai. Yakan, who was watching the fight, exclaimed, "Is he serious? Let him hit harder." Yuk walked up to Punan and asked when he was going to put her neck back in place. Punan became angry and yelled, "Can't you see I'm talking to my master now?" She shuddered in fear and, with tears in her eyes, stepped aside, apologizing. Then she muttered a curse under her breath. Punan turned and asked sharply, "What did you just say?" She nervously replied, "I didn't say anything." He didn't believe her and said she had definitely cursed. She avoided his gaze and insisted, "That didn't happen. It's true." Yakan, irritated, told two of them to shut up and let her watch the fight. Yuk, displeased, retorted, "In fact, Jan's little sister is always cursing, so why is he only bothering me?" Punan approached her, his gaze sharp and imposing. Terrifying expression, he said that this woman had been through a lot and was crazy from the beginning. Yuke looked down because she couldn't face him out of fear. Yakan got angry again and, calling him a stinking dog, ordered him to speak more quietly since there were too many handsome men around. One of the warriors in white clothes, who overheard her words, flinched in surprise. Meanwhile, Mick stood between his servant and the girl, ordering him to stop immediately. However, Punan ignored him and, with a gloomy expression, demanded Yuk admit what she had said. Yakan exclaimed that she had asked them to be quiet, as it was distracting her. Yuk couldn't take it anymore, and with tears in her eyes screamed that she admitted to swearing. Punan felt calmer and laughed loudly, declaring that he knew it. Then, pointing his finger at her, he told the master that he was right before bursting into even louder laughter. Yuk began to sob, and Yakan, meanwhile, instructed the warriors on how and where to hit their enemies. Finding himself in the middle of this madhouse, Yugong looked up at the sky and muttered about the chaos surrounding him. Noticing that Yakan had suddenly become quiet, he saw her reaching for a whistle on the ground. She asked if someone had dropped it. Deciding to support the warriors, she blew into the whistle and happily told everyone to die. The whistling sound echoed throughout the forest. A man, hearing the signal, climbed down from a tree to a house, went inside, and informed the leader of the Black Dragon squad that they had removed everyone except the Green Forest bandits. The man, standing inside the house among corpses, ordered him to call their people as they prepared to confront the Green Forest bandits. Back in the fight, a squad member, hearing the whistle, turned around in shock and exclaimed, "What the hell is she doing?" His comrade replied that since she had whistled, they needed to hurry. Yugong found this suspicious and thought that there might be more members of their squads elsewhere. Deciding it was best to leave before it was too late, he noticed the chaos unfolding behind him. Frustrated, he turned to Punan and ordered him to let Yuk go. Punan promptly returned Yuk's neck to its proper position. Overjoyed to be free, Yuk consulted Punan in her thoughts, hoping never to meet him again. She bowed to him and thanked him with a smile, but he told her not to. Confused, she gave him a surprised look, after which he poked her in the sides with his fingers, causing her to scream. The young master shouted angrily, calling Punan an idiot and questioning why he had put her on all fours. Yakan burst into tears of laughter. Punan replied that it was Yuk's own fault. Calling him names also meant calling the master names. Enraged, the young master asked if he wasn't supposed to ask for permission first. Punan dismissed his anger, suggesting they continue up the mountain before sunset. Yugong irritably agreed and headed towards the mountain, sarcastically questioning when Punan had ever listened to him. He allowed him to do as he pleased. Punan bowed and thanked him for his immeasurable mercy before they set off. As they departed, Yakan wished the warriors good luck and ran after them. The warriors stared after them in shock, wondering who they were. Some time passed, and soon they were on a path leading to a huge palace. Looking at the building in the distance, Mick realized they had ended up right in front of the headquarters of the bandits. Punan stopped and asked himself what was going on. Yugong replied that he was trying to count the enemies using his techniques. He observed that there were many warriors from the Black Dragon squad along the path, including their leader. After assessing, he reported that there were about 500 of them. Yugong cursed and, with a smile, commented that at this rate, they wouldn't get inside. Punan suggested that he could simply destroy the entire squad, but admitted he was concerned about getting hurt if they moved together. Yugong replied irately that he would wait for him there, but first they needed to hide. Hearing this, Punan immediately began digging into the ground. Yugong approached, bewildered, and asked why he was doing that. Punan looked up at him with a smile and said that he had recently practiced hiding underground to study the art of stealth. It was high time to use the technique. Yugong's face darkened and he asked if Punan was really planning to bury him in the mountains. At that moment, Yakan called out in annoyance, asking why he was standing there frozen. Had he decided to pray? She pushed past him, but froze in place when she saw what Punan was doing. He turned a menacing look at her, causing her to scream loudly in fear and run into the forest, exclaiming that she didn't want to be buried alive. Punan reacted instantly, chasing after her, grabbing her by the neck, and knocking her to the ground. After catching her, he jumped up and threw her into the hole he had dug, ordering her to climb in silently. A crash echoed from her landing. Muglan's shadow loomed threateningly over him. Startled by Punan's sudden approach, Yugong stepped back, lost his footing, and fell into the hole, yelling that Punan was an idiot. A loud crash followed. Nearby, a green forest scout named Kwanzaa heard the noise and wondered what it was. "Another scout," Yungu asked him for a situation report. Kwanzaa replied that members of the Black Dragon squad were waiting for reinforcements from the 7-1 ghosts. Yungu noted that it seemed they were preparing to attack. He then looked at the crowd of warriors below and an unknown man among them. Feeling a surge of incredible energy, he asked if man could be one of the Wan ghosts. Meanwhile, Punan appeared before the leader of the Black Dragon squad, who asked in confusion, "Who the hell are you?" Punan didn't reply. The squad leader dismissed him, saying it didn't matter who he was. Soon he would be dead. He ordered his men to get rid of Punan, and they rushed at him in a crowd to carry out the command. The leader sighed in displeasure, thinking his warriors were wasting time. However, the warriors failed immediately at Punan's hands, and the squad leader turned in surprise as his men fell lifeless around the stranger. Enraged, the remaining squad members charged at Punan. He grabbed one warrior's hand, swung it, and splashed blood into the eyes of another. The blinded warrior cursed loudly but was unable to react in time before Punan finished him off. The squad leader then entered the battle, calling Punan a puppy and swinging his sword. Punan grabbed his hand and hurled him with all his might. The squad leader was thrown backward, crashing through several tree trunks. The remaining squad members froze in fear. One of them exclaimed, "How could he break our leader?" Deciding to defeat the stranger with sheer numbers, they attacked from all sides. Punan prepared for their assault, swung his sword, and unleashed a powerful energy wave that destroyed everything around him. The scouts watching from afar were horrified, Kwanzaa said in disbelief. "This is impossible." The entire Black Dragon squad had been wiped out with a single blow. At the foot of the cliff, a massive pile of corpses lay amidst a giant depression in the ground caused by Punan's attack. Kwanzaa remarked that even the 7-1 ghosts couldn't do such a thing. Who was this man? His comrade urged him to stop gawking and report to their command quickly. The two scouts ran towards their base. A shining child watching from a tree became nervous. He thought to himself that while cutting off the head of the Black Dragon Squad's leader was easy, seeing someone destroy 100 soldiers and their leader in 10 seconds was terrifying. This level of power was to be expected from a disciple of the heavenly demon. After all, his teacher had subdued Jianggu. The child wondered if he would be able to handle him. He nervously laughed at this thought as the scouts returned to the Green Forest headquarters. Kwanzaa reported to the master that the Black Dragon Squad would soon be destroyed. The man laughed and said that it was a pity, as an unexpectedly excellent turn of events had occurred. The enemy of the Black Dragon Squad was their friend. He instructed them to be polite to him and give him a warm welcome, following all the norms of bandit etiquette. Meanwhile, Punan finally dug up the young master, who looked at him with displeasure as he bowed his head. The man said that the leader of the Black Dragon Squad was destroyed, and he apologized for not being able to provide him with a more comfortable environment to wait. Yugong couldn't stand it and shouted, asking if that was all he could say after burying him. Punan bowed again and said that he would make sure the young master could wash himself properly. His master walked past him, calling him a scoundrel, and told him not to expect mercy next time. Yakan, walking behind them, pointed her finger at Punan and insulted him loudly before rushing into battle. Punan immediately attacked back, and she lost consciousness. He noticed someone coming and warned the master about it. Shortly after, the Green Forest scouts appeared. Kwanzaa introduced himself and greeted them, saying they had come on the orders of the head of the Green Forest. They looked at the girl and wondered if she was a corpse. Kwanzaa nervously asked, with a smile, if they were the ones who destroyed the Black Dragon Squad. Yugong narrowed his eyes suspiciously at them, and his servant became furious with rage, saying that he should gouge out their eyes. Mac asked if this was really happening again. Punan replied that he was the greatest master and had to be perfect. He couldn't let them see him like this, which made scouts nervous. The young master pointed his finger at his servant and exclaimed in rage, asking who was to blame for this, and why he destroyed the Black Dragon Squad. He told Punan not to kill people so thoughtlessly. Punan tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose and replied that they left him no other choice. These guys were fighting to the death, and it would have been difficult to subdue them. He decided that death was the only way to acknowledge their warrior spirit. At his words, Yugong thought for a second and said that he didn't know the Black Dragon Squad was so strong. He stopped reproaching Punan, while the scouts nervously wondered if he truly believed him or if he just wanted to kill them. Punan called out to them in displeasure, which made them even more nervous. He then ordered them to lower their eyes to the floor and take him to the leader of the garbage bin.